Can I ask the Minister for Policy and Reform whether the legislation relating to charities publishing accounts, declarations of interests and pay of executives and directors requires to be revised?
Minister to reply. Mr Thomas. An answer has been circulated. You may wish just to refer to that fact, Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. And as you say, Mr President, I've circulated a written answer to help this Honourable Court prepare even better supplementary questions to put me in an even more dangerous and fraught situation. Obviously, it's frustrating for people listening to this or to the journalists, but that information will be available very shortly, the written form information that I've circulated in advance.
Ms Edge.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank the Minister for his written response. And I'm pleased that there's going to be a consultation will take place. Would the Minister confirm that he'll aim to include a questions within this about public reporting of charities' accounts for greater transparency?
Minister.
Yes, Mr President. There has already been stakeholder consultation, and the transparency of the accounting information was one issue that was consulted on internally, and I believe when the draft legislation is prepared and that goes out to consultation, the honourable member will see that the nature in which the way in which accounting information is presented and its nature will also be considered in that consultation and thereafter in the legislation that we hope to have in the branches of this Honourable Court with a fair wind and with a bit of space being created in legislative drafting time this year.
Supplementary, Dr Allinson.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Minister agree that the Isle of Man consistently has been shown to be an incredibly generous place, reference to the Poppy Appeal amongst others, but also I think there is an obligation on charities to show where that money goes, and so would he also agree that actually publishing charity accounts and showing the pay for executive members is very important to show that evidence of transparency, and that the money that the people of Isle of Man are giving goes to the right cause?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The requirement for charities to file accounts is set out in Section 5 of the Charities Registration Act, which requires each registered charity to cause its accounts to be made up at least once in each calendar year, to be audited, and then they're filed. It's normally possible, subject to good practice, for the public to obtain information in those accounts. I've always found that I could. There is presently no requirement for charities to file an annual report or annual return as to their activities. This is something that I do believe can be developed, as do the legislative drafters and the policy makers behind this, and I think it's something that the Honourable Questioner will be pleased to see in the legislation. It'll have to be risk-based and it'll have to be proportionate, but I think it will be something that will be there.
Supplementary, Mr Baker.
Thank you, Mr President. Would the Minister agree with me that the number of charities we have on the island is part of the rich fabric of island life, and that we need to be careful to both support those charities at the same time as encouraging them to improve their transparency and professionalism, so that we don't end up with a loss of charitable giving in the third sector on the island, which could result from more regulation and bureaucracy?
Minister to reply.
Thank you very much, Mr President. And there is obviously a conflict between the valid aspirations of the Honourable Member for Ayr and Michael, enshrined in the question that he just asked and the one of the previous questioner from Ramsey, because if we want the public to be able to know information about what happened to their money, we need a degree of law around this, and we need a degree of transparency around this. So we've got to balance what was termed bureaucracy with the need for transparency. So we do need a risk-adjusted and a proportionate Manx system. I doubt we'll end up having a charities commission here, but I do think that the law should encourage transparency. The other point to make, given that this was in my written answer, but the other point to make is that how government relates to the third sector and the internal governance of charities are separate issues from what the law needs to put in place. I contend and argue, and that will be more apparent when the law is proposed for members and the general public to consider as part of the forthcoming consultation.
Supplementary, Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank the Minister for his answer there, and I'd ask him just to confirm that in order to encourage some of these smaller charities to move to the standards that we are going to require going forward, that there's going to be appropriate support provided to ensure that they can make that transition.
Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for the chance to answer that question. But when you start needing to provide support, could that not be perceived as being bureaucratic and providing red tape? To me, it's a very major undertaking to take money off people for a charitable purpose. You shouldn't go into it lightly. It does involve risk to you for having taken somebody else's money for another purpose. And what I would say is I've got in mind now a particularly wise person in the island who, whenever gets approached about somebody setting up a new charity, that person really asks them to think whether the Isle of Man really does need a new charity in memory of something, some purpose or some event. Would it not be better to work with an existing charity? Because there are systems and there are bureaucracies, so I wanted to put that on record as well. There was a famous moment in the 60s, 70s, 80s when we had nearly 20 cancer charities, and there was talk about setting up a 21st one or something like that. And so I would ask everybody thinking about doing something worthwhile, providing time, providing money, providing energy, providing enthusiasm, could they not do it inside existing charitable structures rather than having new charitable structures, because it is onerous taking on the burdens of being a trustee and taking part in the governance arrangements of charitable activities.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, to build on the previous question by the Honourable Member Mr Baker, will the Minister support the work of John Wilkinson, Martin Blackburn and others in bringing charity trustees together and explaining their obligations and how to support them and to bring them together, and also to exchange information and best practice as part of an ongoing programme of raising standards?
Thank you, Honourable Mr. President, and to the Honourable Questioner, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, working together, cooperating, collaboration is always valuable. I'm sure that sounds like a very good initiative. Earlier this morning we talked about the demand responsive transport initiative, and I think that arose out of a Red Group project years ago as part of the public service development programme in part. I've certainly seen a report from a number of years ago, and this year I believe some of the senior leadership training programmes has resolved about best practice in charities in the third sector, and I think they've talked about having a charities champion in the island, and I'm sure we do need to make sure that people are realistic when they set up charities, but they're also encouraged and enabled to realise the enthusiasm that they have.